Venezuelan political parties are closing their campaigns ahead of the election of the governor of the state of Barinas this Sunday. 2 Palestinians were killed and 2 others injured in attacks by the Israeli forces and settlers in the occupied West Bank this Thursday. Russian troops have arrived in Kazakhstan as part of a peacekeeping mission of the Collective Security Treaty Organization in response to a request from the country's president. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is from the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan political parties are closing their campaigns ahead of the election of the governor of the state of Barinas this Sunday. The campaign committee of the Great Patriotic Pole Alliance, whose candidate for governor is former Foreign Minister Jorge Arias, called for a massive rally in the city of Barinas this Thursday as part of the closing activities of the campaign. In a tour of the state deemed the Caravan of Hope, Arias reiterated his commitment to work for the welfare and productive growth of the region. Sunday's vote comes after the results of the November 21st elections for the position of governor of Barinas were overturned due to violations in the process, as an opposition candidate was disqualified from running due to an ongoing corruption investigation. Argentina's government delivered a clear challenge to the International Monetary Fund, noting it won't accept austerity measures that threaten economic recovery. At an event attended by cabinet officials, provincial governors and business leaders, President Alberto Fernandez called on the international community to support his government's bid to reach a new financing agreement with the fund. Argentina is seeking a new extended fund facility program with the IMF to restructure its existing $44 billion debt, delivered as part of the lender's record $57 billion credit line agreed in 2018 with the government of former President Mauricio Macri. President Fernandez stated that the government has so far been unable to settle its differences with the IMF on the size of the country's fiscal deficit in the years to come.
We all would have liked to receive a country without this debt, because debts are definitely conditional. A person with a debt will always have a burden to carry. And when we get into debt, we limit ourselves. We have a difficult load to carry. This, unfortunately, was not taken into account when the debt was acquired.
No se tuvo en cuenta en el momento en que esta deuda se tomó. Pero a nosotros,
but we were voted in to solve the problem, and what we are looking for are solutions that guarantee Argentina, which is now in a stage of growth, does not see itself limited by favoring outside creditors, either private or international organizations such as the fund.
El Salvador Supreme Court ordered the reopening of an investigation into the 1989 massacre of 6 Jesuit priests that sparked international outrage. Previous attempts to investigate and prosecute the masterminds of the killings during the Civil War have been deflected by legal maneuvers since the High Court declared the 1993 amnesty, established after the war, to be unconstitutional in 2016. A few years ago, a lower court had ruled that an investigation could go ahead into the alleged involvement of a group of military officers and former President Alfredo Cristiani in the killings, but the investigation was put on hold when the officers appealed to the Supreme Court in 2019. On November 16, 1989, an elite commando unit killed 6 priests, along with their housekeeper and the housekeeper's daughter, in the priest's residence. The killers tried to make the massacre appear as though it had been carried out by leftist guerrillas. Only 2 military officers have served short sentences for the crime. A Haitian human rights organization reported that at least 6 people were killed during last weekend's recent assassination attempt against Prime Minister Ariel Henry. In a message on Twitter, the Hands Together for Haiti's development organization claimed to have completed an investigation into the incident that occurred on January 1st as part of the Independence Day celebrations. According to the report, 3 officers died in a police station and another as a result of wounds sustained during an exchange of fire. In the case of the former, the organization claims that their colleagues did everything possible to recover the bodies without leaving any evidence. Another 2 victims, one of them apparently from the official government delegation, were also killed. A strong earthquake shook Nicaragua on Thursday morning, sending people fleeing into the streets, but with no initial reports of damage. Preliminary data showed that the 6.1 magnitude earthquake had a depth of around 17 kilometers, with an epicenter on the country's Pacific coast. Vice President Rosario Murillo, speaking a few minutes after the quake, alluded to reports from Managua and the western municipalities where it was widely felt, causing people to rush out of buildings onto the streets. Murillo recalled the necessary safety measures to be adopted and called on citizens to pay attention to any alerts issued. And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The World Health Organization has endorsed the strong measures adopted in China against COVID-19 ahead of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, stressing that there is no particular risk posed by the holding of the Games.
To monitor the situation, but certainly at this stage, given the arrangements that have been put in place for the athletes and by the organisers, we don't perceive that there's any particular extra risk in hosting or running the games. But obviously we will keep all of the measures that are being put in place under constant review.
And the Director General of the World Health Organization has stressed that application of vaccine booster shots in a small number of countries, while billions have not received a single dose, will not mean an end to the pandemic.
Booster after booster in a small number of countries will not end a pandemic while billions remain completely unprotected. But we can and must turn it around. In the short term, we can end the acute stage of this pandemic while preparing now for future ones. Last week, the highest number of COVID-19 cases were reported so far in the pandemic. And we know for certain that this is an underestimate of cases because reported numbers do not reflect the backlog of testing around the holidays, the number of positive self-tests not registered, and burdened surveillance systems that miss cases around the world.
The Bolivian Ministry of Health reported a new record in the demand for vaccination, as well as a fall in COVID-19 mortality rates. Our correspondent Freddy Morales has the story.
With a health emergency declared a week ago, institutions are compliant with the restrictions. Anyone who is not vaccinated will present a PCR test as required. And there is another possibility. If a colleague does not present an ID card and is not able to take the test, he or she will only be able to participate in a section virtually. I recommend that my students, teachers, and administrative staff get vaccinated, because if you are going to take the PCR test, it costs you at least 400 pesos, and every time you use it, you have to do it again. I recommend vaccination. With the increase of new infections due to the fourth wave, there is also a growing anti-vaccination campaign for religious reasons, misinformation, or based on myths. The government is responding with verified data. Remember what happened in the first wave? There was the collapse of cemeteries, crematoriums were not able to keep up with the demand. The morgues of our hospital were full. There were reports that the National Health Fund had established cold chambers to store the corpses. We are not experiencing that situation right now, despite having a huge increase in cases, 34,000 cases in 1 week, but despite this, the mortality rate is still below 1%, 0.8% to be exact. Despite anti-vaccine campaigns, a record immunization rate was recorded on Monday with more than 140,000 doses administered in a single day. Severe cases occurred in people who have not received the vaccine. On average, 8 out of every 10 patients hospitalized in ICU units or who have died are unvaccinated people. And although this is a painful reality, we must convey as such to our population in a country where the vaccine is available. Among the measures in place due to the health emergency are the requirement of a vaccination card for all official procedures and entry to closed space, price controls for medicines to treat COVID, a ban of the suspension of health service, and prohibition of excessive charge at private clinics when admitting patients to intensive care units.
Freddy Morales, teleSUR, Bolivia.
The Mexican government offered an update on the evolution of the pandemic, noting an increase in the number of COVID-19 cases, but no increase in the number of hospitalizations, while authorities maintain epidemiological surveillance of the Omicron variant. Our correspondent Edward Martinez brings us more details.
Class at the primary education level began in 21 of the 32 states of Mexico. Students, parents and teachers must comply with biosecurity measures to avoid COVID-19 infections, especially among younger children who are not yet included in the national vaccination plan. It is something to be very careful about because, as far as we know, it is already infecting children more than adults, and we need to adopt more safety measures. In most schools, staff and students have had to adapt to avoid overcrowding and to guarantee hygiene, service, and healthy distance.
Now there are only 14 because there is no water. We cannot supply all the classrooms, which usually have 30 students.
Local authorities decided to postpone the return to school in 11 states until having a better understanding of the evolution of the epidemic caused by SARS-CoV-2. Meanwhile, from the National Palace, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador called for trust and a return to classrooms. Parents really help us. If a child has a sore throat, if they feel bad, then they should not go to school. They should stay at home. But if they feel fine, well, there is no problem for them to go. There are measures in place at the schools. Health authorities explain the recent increase in the number of cases is related to the Omicron variant of the coronavirus. It allows us to see that it is more contagious, but of course, from a clinical perspective, the symptoms, the consequence, the hospitalizations and mortality rates are very low. Today, the country has registered 3.9 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 300,000 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic announced in late March 2020. Meanwhile, the national vaccination plan with the booster shot for adults over 60 years of age is moving forward, and 2.7 million doses of the Barinas vaccine donated by the U.S. government will be administered to educational personnel.
Eduardo Martínez, teleSUR, Ciudad de México.
Winter storms in the United States have delayed the shipment to Mexico of 1.2 million COVID-19 vaccine doses donated by the Moderna pharmaceutical company. Mexican Foreign Secretary Marcelo Ebrard announced the arrival of the batch of vaccines on Monday, noting that it was the first donation to come directly from a U.S. company in the context of the pandemic. Authorities had planned to roll out further booster shots against the coronavirus with the shipment, but the campaign has been delayed due to the bad weather. Now we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. 2 Palestinians were killed and 2 others injured in attacks by the Israeli forces and settlers in the occupied West Bank this Thursday. Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that the occupation forces stormed the refugee camps of Balata, east of Nablus, and Al-Fahar, south of Tubas, killing 21-year-old Barkid Hashish and wounding 2 other young men while arresting a third. Meanwhile, 2 Palestinians were run over by Israeli settlers in 2 separate incidents on West Bank roads, in which Mustafa Yassin Filna, aged 25, and Shafaki Bisarat, aged 48, was wounded. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry warned against the rise in incidents involving Israeli settlers, stressing that running down Palestinians appeared to be premeditated, while condemning Israeli police indifference. Sudanese protesters braved tear gas and water cannons on Thursday as they rallied in the capital Khartoum against the military and to demand a transition to civilian rule. According to the Central Committee of Sudan doctors, 2 protesters were killed on Thursday while taking part in the latest mass demonstrations against the October 25th military coup. The latest killings bring the overall death toll since to 59, the committee added. The power grab by Military Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan more than 2 months ago dismantled a precarious power-sharing arrangement between the military and civilians established in the wake of the April 2019 ouster of longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir. The latest pro-democracy mobilizations come in the wake of the resignation of interim Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who was reinstated in a November 21st deal with the military after international pressure. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi arrived in the Comoros on Thursday as part of a 3-nation tour of Africa in what is a decades-long tradition. For the past 30 years, the Chinese Foreign Minister's first international tour of each new year has been to Africa. This year, the tour saw Yi visit Eritrea, Kenya and the Comoros. On Thursday, the Foreign Minister rejected suggestions that Beijing was luring African countries into debt traps by offering them massive loans, dismissing the idea as a narrative pushed by opponents to poverty reduction. China is Africa's largest trading partner, with direct trade worth over $200 billion in 2019. A large number of major infrastructure projects have been completed across Africa due to the preferential financing offered by China. Russian troops have arrived in Kazakhstan as part of a peacekeeping mission of the Collective Security Treaty Organization in response to a request from the country's president. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev requested support from the alliance made up of Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in the midst of violent unrest in the country. Demonstrations that began in rejection of rising fuel prices quickly spread to other parts of the nation and escalated into attacks on public buildings and infrastructure, including military installations and an airport, suggesting a high level of coordination and training of the groups committing these acts. According to analysis, it was determined that terrorist groups with foreign training had launched attacks seeking to destabilize the country. Staying in Kazakhstan, at least 13 security agents were killed and over 300 wounded after clashes in the city of Almaty. The city's military quartermaster's office informed that 2 members of the security forces had been decapitated as the violence continued. On Thursday morning, several armoured vehicles and dozens of troops entered the main square of Almaty to restore order. The Russian agency TASS reported that so far more than 1,000 people have been injured in the unrest in several regions of the country, 400 of whom were hospitalized, according to the Kazakh Health Ministry. Meanwhile, according to news outlet Russia Today, in the city of Aktau in western Kazakhstan, protesters ended their peaceful mobilization on agreeing that the authorities had met their demands. The peaceful protests against the rise in fuel prices and the cost of living contrasted with the coordinated and violent attacks on public facilities in other parts of the country. In response to the initial protests, the president ordered a moratorium on increasing utility rates for 6 months and price regulation to stop the rise in fuel prices, as well as state regulation of key foodstuffs. The Israeli regime launched artillery strikes against positions in the southern Syrian province of Al-Qanetra on Wednesday night. According to local media reports, the strikes on the village of Al-Hurriya coincided with the overflight of Israeli helicopters, reconnaissance planes and drones in the area. Pan-Arabist satellite television channel Al Mayadeen reported a fire in the village after the attack. On December 28th, the Israeli regime launched missile attacks on the container yard of the commercial port of Latakia, causing important material losses. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.